My name is Juliana Dodson. I'm the Executive Director of the Hannah Grimes Center, which organizes this event. Thank you. And stewards the radically rural community, along with so many amazing partners and volunteers, including our co-founder, the Keene Sentinel. This year is our 8th annual summit, and it's my privilege to welcome you here to this very special gathering. I know lots of you had many hoops to jump through to get here, some more than others. We do have folks from Hawaii here, so that's amazing. Real examples, illness of yourself or a loved one, flight delays, you name it. A lot of hoops to jump through to get here. But I invite you to just pause for a moment and arrive because you made it, you're here. So take a deep breath and just recognize that at this point, your job is to be present and curious, unless you have other jobs too, which a lot of you do. How many of you participated in the track day yesterday? Yeah? How was it? Yeah? That was definitely an experiment, and perhaps the most complicated day we've ever organized, but we appreciate you joining for the experiment, and at least for the track that I was with most of the day, which was Land and Community, oh my gosh, was it worth it. One of the things that I loved about it, and I think what speaks volumes about why folks come to Radically Rural, is that even though part of the motivation for yesterday's day was to give sectors a chance to spend time together and build community and connection among folks doing similar work. In the land track, we had people in health, arts, energy, you name it. It was like even trying to give people a lane that they could be in for a day, they just couldn't help it because they recognized the deeper entanglement and that everything actually is connected and we have to work on things together. And it was beautiful. Slide change. There. Just so you know what to expect this morning, we will hear some wonderful music, a story, we'll welcome our keynotes, the Resonance Network, and in between you'll hear comments and gratitude from me. You have noticed by now that we have an extra screen there. We have a graphic recorder joining us virtually to record what we learned during our plenary sessions. In addition to leaving with a visual representation of our time together, it is also to provide another layer of accessibility for those who may learn more visually. I spent a lot of time studying and sitting with land acknowledgement preparing for this morning, but when I read what was written for the play that took place at Hannah Grimes last night, You, Me, and the Woodsmoke, how many of you were there? How was it? Good? I heard it was amazing. So I set mine aside that I had spent so much time on, and now I will gratefully share what Catherine Stewart so beautifully wrote. At Radically Rural, we gather on the soil of Abenaki, Wabanaki, and Pennacook peoples as ground for possibility. Whether you're from this community or have traveled far to be here, the land beneath your feet matters, and the forests around you hold histories. Our communities are alive with potential. Let this forest reignite what matters to you and carry it home. Listen for the music, breathe with the trees, stay with the tension between what is ruptured and what might yet be repaired. Thank you, Catherine, for that. And because we know that acknowledgement without accountability to repair is void, we linked 2 poems by the Gesturing Toward Decolonial Futures initiative in the website agenda session description. We encourage you to spend time with these when you go home and wonder about what might move in your knowing and being in the world if we were to really embody relational accountability with each other in the land. Okay, now some music. Speaking of music. We're trying something a little different this year. During the plenary sessions, I've enlisted some of our advisory group members to help me with my comments. It's a great way for y'all to get introduced to these wonderful people and see a different face and hear a different voice, which I'm ready for. And so I thought, who better to introduce our musician than Jeffrey Kirshner from Virginia, founder of Small Town Big Arts. Come on over, Jeff.
Thank you.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm good.
I want to reflect on why we start with music every year. In physics, resonance happens when one vibration sets another into motion and amplifies it. When something begins to move, not by force, but with harmony.
The same is true for us. Music invites our bodies, minds, and spirits to find that shared frequency. Our hearts slow, our attention focuses, our energy attunes. We begin to synchronize. In that shared state, we become more open, more able to listen, imagine, and create together.
So, as we open this year's summit with the theme Resonance, let this music remind us that connection isn't just some intangible idea. It's a vibration that we can actually feel, one that is scientifically literal, and one that carries us through everything we'll do over the next 2 days. Jeff, feel free to introduce our musician now.
John Hughes joins us from right across the river in Brattleboro, Vermont. He is a musician whose style crosses cultural boundaries, blending influences on ancient instruments, many of which he builds himself. It's incredible. His kora playing, both traditional and original, is known for its uncommon beauty, with rhythms and syncopations that draw listeners into a mesmerizing landscape. John is also a sculptor, dancer, instrument builder, and educator, with degrees from Temple University, West Surrey College of Art and Design, and a Master's of Fine Arts from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He has spent more than 28 years studying West African music, song, and dance, with masters from Guinea and Mali, grounding his unique style in ancient Mande repertoire while offering audiences uplifting expressions of joy and hope. So let's welcome John.
Good morning. I brought with me this instrument, which is a traditional ancient instrument from West Africa. It's called a kora. It has 22 strings, and it's been around for almost 1,000 years. Not this one. I'm going to play 2 quick songs. Both of them are original, and they are interpretations of old traditional songs from West Africa. Thank you. Yeah, yalla la ke silango jangma ke kobe kai baile alala boro jang te baile. Molaji como molati, molaji como molati, molaji como molati. Hani babolaji ko be baileto. Molaji como molati, molaji como molati, molaji como molati. Yeah, yalla la ke. Yeah, yalla la ke. Yeah, yalla la ke. Silango jangma ke kobe kai baile. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your conference.
That was incredible. Thank you so much, John, for sharing your gifts with us this morning. Okay, time for some gratitude. Radically Rural is only possible with an incredible groundswell of support locally and nationally. I will begin with our teams that have made this possible. The local planning, track leader, and advisory group teams have been meeting since last year's summit closed to prepare for this year. These are volunteers who give much of their time and now include some of my very best friends in the world. If you're on the local planning team, please stand up and wave. And many of them are probably out there. Thank you so much for all the work you've put into creating a wonderful and welcoming experience for those attending and for those in our community who are hosting. Every detail matters, and we have a lot of fun. We laugh a lot. Our intern Jack from MC Squared can tell you that. If you are on the National Advisory Group team, will you please stand up and wave? Thank you for giving your time to share yourselves, your places, and help us shape the theme and arc of the event. I treasure each and every one of you. If you are a track leader, please stand up and wave. Thank you for building incredible programming and shepherding the track-specific communities. And they do it with such grace and incredible attitudes because they really care. Just this past weekend, when hashing out nitty-gritty details, I was voice memoing / texting with Trisha, who had a friend's sleeping kids on her. Everyone just jumps in and helps. Now, if you are a session leader, please stand up and wave. You'll see some overlap with track leader and advisory group members because they're like, yeah, we don't have enough to do, we want more. Could we do some more things? No, I'm kidding. I roped them all in. We also want to thank all of our speakers who have given their time and talents for us, for the greater good. If you're a speaker, please stand and raise your hand. Deepest thanks to all the Hannah Grimes Center staff, especially Lily and Megan, for being amazing partners in organizing and executing the summit. If you're Hannah Grimes staff, please stand and raise your hand. Sarah, keep standing. It's someone's 40th birthday today. We're going to sing to you later at Connect, whether you like it or not. Thank you to all of our volunteers who are incredible, thoughtful folks. Thank you for being a part of this. If you're a volunteer, please stand or raise your hand. Thank you to our local businesses, many of whom have made specific preparations for your arrival. Thank you to all of our vendors and venues who work with us so graciously and artfully. And a thank you to students as well. We love highlighting students every year. And if you are a student, would you please raise your hand? We want to welcome you and recognize that you're here. Oh, I see 3 of my favorite students up on the front row. Those are my kids. Good morning. Okay, so I'm going off script just for a second. Calm down, Megan. No, I'm kidding. I wanted to talk a little bit about the things that y'all don't see about what makes this possible. And it brings me to the fact that executing an event like this is inherently relational if it's going to be transformative. You cannot do this purely transactionally. So I'm texting our library director, hooking an attendee up with her guest room to stay. I'm talking with board members who are sharing their homes and people who are giving other people rides and showing up to volunteer, and you can't even imagine what goes on in order to make this possible and to help people feel welcome. And I just wanted to highlight that truly transformative experiences have to be relational. Even to the extent that I can say it now because we're through it, but we lost all of our transportation last week for the field trips. Yeah, and Tori, thank you for all your time in calling like every bus company in New England to try to figure out a solution. And I called my kid's bus driver, and I was like, Paula, do you drive for any other events? And she was like, yeah, what do you need? And she showed up, and she was there with us yesterday and made it all happen. And I was like, yeah, we need each other. So. And neighbors showing up. Hi, Jeff. Hi, Margot. Thanks to all my neighbors for showing up. Okay, and none of this could happen without funding. So I will begin by thanking our summit-level sponsors and grant funders: Northern Border Regional Commission, the Knight Foundation, New Hampshire Business Finance Authority, the Colonial Performing Arts Center, where we are now, the Lenfest Institute. Thank you all so much for your generous support. Thank you to all of our track sponsors. Just take a look and take it all in. These are organizations that share values with us. All of the organizations that sponsor us share values. It's something truly beautiful. When you can loop in a speaker from your pool of sponsors, you know your values aligned. So thank you so much to all of our track level sponsors. And last but not least, thank you to all of our session level sponsors. Round of applause, that's the last one. If anyone has hand lotion to share with each other, you might need it after that, I don't know. Okay, now I would like to share a few highlights from this year, because a lot of you maybe only know us for our annual summit, but our community is year-round. So as we have for 4 years, we've had virtual roundtables on topics like voting deserts, innovative rural business models, and navigating downtown infrastructure projects. We piloted this year, we're still in the middle of it, a closed study group called Entangled Economics, which stems from a session we did last year. I was able to speak at the Rural Club at Stanford University. We joined a gathering at Aspen Community Strategies Group in DC with other rural leaders from all over the country. And we visited many partners and collaborators, including several of our rural biotech hubs. And then there was Radically Rural on the Road, where we visited Lewisburg, Tennessee this year. Jody was my travel partner. Jody, are you here? Hi. We really got to know each other well that trip. Read my blog on LinkedIn if you want to know more about that. And Jess Limbert and a small team of folks from Marshall County were our hosts. The folks in Lewisburg did a really amazing job of using the opportunity to gather and explore topics that were important to them. Next year, we're visiting White Sulphur Springs, Montana, and volunteering for the amazing Red Ants Pants Festival they host in a cow pasture, so that's fun. And then now, let's talk about the traveling quilt. How many of you remember making the quilt last year? Yeah, how many of you were a part of making the quilt? That's what I thought. It was a physical representation of last year's theme, which was regenerating rural by reweaving our social fabric. Say that 10 times. Every town who hosts it can use it as an opportunity to highlight or actively weave social connectedness in their place in whatever way suits them best. It started in Belchertown, Massachusetts. Any Belchertown folks here? Woo-woo, welcome. Oh, I lost my place, pause. Where they developed community programming, especially around the arts with the quilt. You can see the crochet square they added after in that upper left-hand corner. It's adorable. And then it made its way to Lewisburg, where we were able to visit it, and you can see the patch they added. And I'm going to invite advisory group member and friend Jess Limbird to tell us just briefly about what the patch is, and then a sentence about what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, so the Marshall County patch was added by Savannah and Summer Cole. They are identical twins. They literally have a mole that is different between the two of them. They're also owners of the Wilted Tulip. It's a bespoke costume design shop. They're also the co-presidents of the Marshall County Arts Guild, so yay for rural art spaces, where the quilt was displayed during Radically Rural on the Road. And that's just the outline of Marshall County. You can see Lewisburg is the county seat in the center. Radically Rural on the Road provided us a chance to connect, to dream together, and to center essential conversations that feel really relevant to our collective well-being. We unearthed pain points, but also points of pride, and the week ended powerfully and made space for a next step, the Together Project, which I'll tell you more about tomorrow during the Solutions Slam.
Okay. Thank you. Now the quilt is in Brainerd, Minnesota. Where's Dawn? Where's Dawn? There you are. So Dawn from the Sewing Room used some grant funding to come visit us this summer and learn about how to host a conference using your whole downtown. And the quilt is now in her community. Okay, and if you want to host the quilt, email radicallyrural@hannahgrimes.com. Now, we are once again mixing it up, and rather than having poetry this year, we have a local journeyman storyteller. This is multi-purposed and ties to our theme on many levels, but I'll mention only one. If anyone's going to Bill White's Thursday afternoon session on creative problem solving, you're going to learn about something called the excursion. So sometimes going on an excursion that may feel unconnected actually puts us in the perfect place to think differently. So I'm going to let Jess introduce our storyteller.
Myths, tall tales, and epics have been part of Jake Lewis's life since a young age. Making sense of the world through old stories has always made sense to him. Jake has guided people on transformative educational experiences for nearly 15 years and combines that dirt time with a deep study of the human psyche, a playful spirit, and a reverence for participation. With a background in professional theater and audio recordings and studies with master storytellers, Jake's tellings bring an array of characters to life in deeply human and more than human ways. Welcome, Jake.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I'm here to share two stories with you that I hope will plant themselves into your imaginations and give a little shape to your questions and your wonderings, your learnings, and your connections here at this conference. The first story comes from Borneo, and among many other things, it addresses the return, coming home with something new or renewing. And the story is called The Half Girl. It goes a little something like this. Once there was a village, and in that village there was born a little girl. But there was only half of her. It was very strange. It was just the right half of her. And there just wasn't a left half. For her whole childhood, she would ask people that she saw around who seemed to have it all together, seemed to be whole. She would say, how did you get that? Where's the other part of me? Where's the rest of me that I can't seem to see? But nobody really could give her a satisfactory answer. And as she grew up and became an adolescent, as is proper, she stopped asking and started demanding, where is this other part of me? But nobody could give her a satisfactory answer. So she just left. She left the village, she went off on her own, and she had many adventures. They say and say truly she was out there for so long that there were strands of silver in her hair by the time she came to a great river, which was known in that place and in that time as the Sacred River. And an amazing thing happened when she was there. She looked down the bank of the river, and walking up the bank was another half-girl, but where our half-girl was the right half. This was the left. You would hope that this would create some kind of joyful reunion, sharing shared experiences. Oh, it was hard for me. Oh, it was hard for me too. But instead, they just fought. They just got in a big fight right away, I'm sorry to report. And they tumbled into the river, the two of them, just thrashing around and the water flowing over them. And as they tumbled down the river, our half-girl went into the water as a half-girl. But when she crawled out of the river, she was a whole woman. But she was exhausted, she was hungry, she was wet. And so she went to a nearby village that she knew wasn't too far away. She was greeted at the gate by two elders who they say, and say truly, were dressed all in blue robes. And she went up to them and she said, "Do you have any food or a place to sleep? I'm just totally exhausted. It's been a long life." And the elders smiled at her. And they said, "Don't you recognize where you are? Don't you recognize that you've come home? And don't you see now that everybody you saw in the village had to do what you have now done, which is go out into the world and find that part of you that the village could never provide? And don't you know that we have been singing and dancing and praying for your return when you would come back to us a whole woman?" And indeed, when they said that, she could hear that there was some singing and some dancing happening back in the village. And a bunch of children came out and grabbed her and pulled her into the dance and into the song. And for all I know, they are singing and dancing still. Oh, thank you. So just let those images settle for a moment. Perhaps they stir something in you. Perhaps they relate to something out in your world. Perhaps they even have something to do with something inside of you. And perhaps that will happen again with this second story I have to share with you. This story comes from the Caucasus Mountains, and among many other things, we could note that it addresses a theme that comes up all the time in stories, which is that when there's trouble at the center of the kingdom, when there's something wrong in the center of things, the solution rarely comes from the center. Often, it comes from the edge to the center. This is a story, a prescient story, called The Spyglass. And it goes a little something like this. Once, there was a very skilled hunter, but on this day, no animal would submit to his bow. Instead, he found that he came across 4 creatures that became his animal companions. They gave him a token from their bodies and said, "If you ever need help, burn this thing, and we will come to help you." And those animals were an eagle, a goat, a fish, and a fox. Well, it wasn't long before the hunter did need their help. In his wanderings, he went to the center of the kingdom, and he found that the kingdom was ruled over by a sorcerer king. He had ensorcelled his very daughter. He had given her a magical gift, a spyglass, one of these. And if you looked through that spyglass, you could see anything you wanted to see. If you looked through that spyglass, you could ask it any question you had, and it would find you the answer. It's a very prescient story, like I said. Anyway, this object had enchanted and ensorcelled the princess, and she had made a decree, more like a curse, that if any wished to marry her, they would have to hide from her 3 times over 3 days. And if they could not do it, off with their heads. Many had tried, all had failed. And the young hunter came up and he fancied his odds, but he negotiated for an extra try. He said, "I don't want 3, I want 4 swings at this." And she agreed. Well, for the first 3 attempts, he called in some animal favors, but eventually she did manage to find him. But on the 4th try, He called in the fox, the cunning fox. And the fox dug a little burrow under the wall of the castle, and the burrow ended in a little den. And the den was right underneath the feet of the princess with the spyglass. And there the hunter hid. For who would think to look for that which they seek under their feet? The princess could not find him, and in a fury, she took the spyglass and shattered it against the wall. And it broke into 10,000 pieces, and they say truly, that one thing coming undone unraveled the entire sorcery that held the kingdom fast. The hunter undid the magic of the sorcerer king just by hiding in the place that few of us would think there is any merit in searching. Right where we are. You're very kind. Thank you. I will close by asking a question of you that I always ask when I tell a story, which is, where do you find yourself in this story? Where do you find yourself? And you could take a moment to think on that. But you also might ask each other this question as you move through the rest of this conference. Hey, remember that storyteller guy at the beginning? Those stories? Where did you find yourself? What did you think? And maybe that question will be the start of some marvelous new connection. May it be. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jake. That was wonderful. All right. I've come to a part of our opening session that both is one that I have come to really treasure and look forward to every year, where I can speak from my heart about Radically Rural, but it's also the one I'm the most nervous about because I am speaking from my heart. And after experiencing the day we did yesterday, I changed a lot of this, and I've been furiously making notes to try to weave everything together. So there might be some mixed metaphors and stuff, but let's just go with it. You may remember last year I gave the analogy about the migration of the monarch butterflies. I'm shocked no one yelled out, mid-level monarchs. That was a thing last year. Well, this year I want to talk about our name. Yes, the name, Radically Rural. How many of you have wondered about the name? What it means, why we are named that? Wow, fewer than expected. I get that question a lot. Now, how many of you went through a phase where you didn't like or didn't understand or had a changing relationship with your name? Yeah. How many of you came to a deeper understanding and connection with it later in life? Or maybe you didn't and you just changed it. That's cool too. To be honest, I've had that experience with Radically Rural. So maybe you didn't know this, but I'm not the founder of Radically Rural. I joined almost 5 years ago through a Northern Border Regional Commission grant. Yay, NBRC, we love you. And it really is an art braiding together the past, present, and future with initiatives and organizations that you didn't start. Shout out to Succession Club, which spent a whole year meeting together about that. And it never really, the name never really sat right with me. I took it to mean very rural, like radically rural, very rural, like a descriptor. Others have taken it to mean many other things, including politically radical. And I've always fumbled a little bit trying to explain it, which is a problem when that's the name of the programming. And because you can see here in Keene, even thinking of it as meaning very rural, we're the county seat in a small city of a rural region, but population 23,000, we have access to resources, we're not remote frontier. We have different conditions and opportunities than our remote and frontier communities. So I felt a little embarrassed about it at times. And I would say different things like, oh, we're radically proud to be rural, or it's not just about population size, it's about all these values, which are all true things, but it really didn't connect with me deeply. And this year, one of our advisory group members also my dear friend, author, educator, and nonprofit steward Nicole Savita, listened to me momentarily fumble on a podcast, Granite Goodness. Any shout out to Granite Goodness? Yeah. And she said, she messaged me immediately. She's like, here, read what I wrote about your name for last year's summit that I didn't get to use. And I read it, and everything just clicked for me. And I'd like to invite her up here to read what she wrote, a portion of it, and then I'll share about how, without even knowing it, we've been growing into our name.
Radical doesn't mean extreme. It means rooted. The word comes from the Latin radix, meaning root. It shares its origin with the word radicle, R-A-D-I-C-L-E, which is the tiny embryonic root that first emerges from a seed. So in biology, the radicle signals the beginning of grounded life. It's the first very tender act of rooting into place, seeking connection, nourishment, and stability. That's radical. So when we talk about getting radical in our rural communities, we're not talking about political extremism or ideology. And I know right now that word is being plastered in a lot of places. We're talking about going to the root of our problems, our possibilities, and our belonging. And of course, in nature, roots don't act alone. They form relationships. We saw so much of this yesterday in the land and community track. With mycorrhizal fungi, soil microbes, water flows, and neighboring plants. They build networks of mutual nourishment, and they adapt constantly to their environment. This is the kind of economy and community we need: relational, regenerative, rooted. So getting radical is getting relational. And when you go to the roots and get radical, new things can grow.
I can get behind that. That describes the work that we have already been growing into, which sort of brings me to that different cultures have different perspectives about names, right? Some believe that the name sort of shapes you. Some, it's a descriptor. And I think we were being shaped by it without even knowing it. We like to think of organizations, movements, and programs as being launched as full-grown adults. But in reality, they're babies. And I don't know whether they mature in dog or lizard years or human years or whatever, but something I've been observing over the last couple of years is that Radically Rural is becoming not just older, but wiser too. We've been known for being solutions-focused and pragmatic, and that's great. And I wrestled with that a little bit on the Granite Goodness podcast I mentioned. Like our founder would say, no wringing of the hands over broadband. And that won't change that we're going to be pragmatic and bold in our solutions. But our community is also smart, deeply wise and intuitive, and none of us are interested in pursuing surface-level change that doesn't stick. And we are brave. We will sit with what's uncomfortable and complicated so that we can move effectively. Take this beautiful mess of local yarn spun by one of our entrepreneurs that I had in my office. We might see this and be like, oh, here's the thread, right here, this is it. And we pull. And the harder we pull, what happens? It tightens, right? And it tangles more. And so we have to sit with it, lovingly, tenderly, and with joy. Magnolia, Avonlea, Drew Kate, do you remember that day that we untangled yarn for hours? And then we tied it together and made new balls of yarn and made things out of it? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Now, I want to do this, and I also want to recognize, I know we're about 10 minutes behind. We're going to be 10 minutes late, and that's okay. We're accepting it. And I want to do a little braiding with current events. I really struggled to think about how to set the stage for our time together, wondering what to address from this moment and to what degree of detail with so little time. There's so much suffering globally, nationally, in each of our places. The roots of the suffering are really deep. And addressing the roots will take bravery. And it'll take a kind of connectedness between us that maybe we haven't experienced in our lifetimes up to this point. I couldn't help but feel the deep truth and how what we learned from the land and those working with it yesterday and how that tied into everything we were talking about today. We talked about moving with the natural disturbances that take place, being willing to watch and learn and see who and what shows up, to receive and give abundance. We also talked about, as we were eating this delicious, like I can't even tell you, talk to me about it later, I'll tell you more, just this nourishing food made from primarily nuts, nut flours and oils and things like that, that was nourishing us from what we couldn't access ourselves because the roots of the tree had sucked it up for us and the canopy above had pulled down the light. And so in some ways, when things are tangled, right, we, as a species, are a part of inserting ourselves and kind of creating new conditions so that we can be a part of the process of entangling where we need to, but also pulling up our deepest and most wicked problems by the roots. So what I'd like to leave you with this year from my heart is two angles of this radical prism, right? One is understanding deeply how entangled we actually are. Once we can see how separateness or othering from each other or the rest of the living world is an absolute sham, we gain this immense nourishment and strength. Because of that inherent entanglement, if we are to truly address the deepest and most wicked problems that we have to examine, untangle, grasp at the roots to have any chance in the world. So while we will always lean into joy, wonder, awe, play, we will also accept and sit with discomfort. We will pull and stretch and metabolize it all together. We have 2 days left together. In that time, we're not going to solve any of the new threats, clashes, and crises that make daily headlines. But we do have a chance to learn from each other, to figure out how to make and protect life in the midst of all this mess. And that is why we need community, because it took someone else who attended Radically Rural 2 years ago to help teach me about our name. Thank you. Which brings me to our keynote speakers for this morning. After being introduced to the Resonance Network by Jess Limbird, we knew that they were the perfect teachers to help us dive deeper into inherent understanding of our entanglement through story. So let me tell you a little bit about them. Their full bios are on our website. Please read them. Alexis was a K-12, an adult educator, and certified simultaneous interpreter. She spent 20 years as a bilingual advocate, organizer, and trainer in a statewide sexual and domestic violence coalitions, and as assistant director of a local shelter and rape crisis center. Alexis is currently co-director of the Resonance Network. Ed Heisler has 20 years experience in violence prevention and peacemaking. Formerly the co-executive director of Men as Peacemakers, he focuses on nourishing individual and community connection to spirit, healing, and wholeness as a pathway to interdependent thriving for future generations and ourselves. And with that, I welcome Ed and Alexis to share about their work building beloved community.
Hello, good morning. We are so happy to be here and grateful to be here with you today. And just as is our practice, arriving from different places. I'm arriving from Bowie, Maryland, which is a small city outside of Washington, D.C., where I'm from. And Ed is arriving from Seattle, Washington, but from Duluth, Minnesota. We want to begin by honoring the place that we've gathered here in Keene, New Hampshire, on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Abenaki, Wabanaki, and Pennacook peoples. May our time together honor their ongoing presence and their deep relationship to this land, the land that's going to hold us for our time together. We also want to honor you and the time that you've already spent together, the places that you have come from, the lands that you call home, the places that hold you. You've already been in a day, many of you, of connection with each other, learning, storytelling, building trust, learning about the entanglements under the soil, and that matters. It sets the tone for everything that's still to come. So, as Juliana told you, we're Ed and Alexis from Resonance Network, and we're thrilled to be joining Radically Rural this year. We've admired this conference as we have learned about your work over the last year, because the work that is happening here is not about bringing flashy solutions from the outside in. It's about lifting up the brilliance, the resilience, the creativity that's already alive in rural communities. And that's exactly what drew us here. What's right here under our feet, right? At Resonance, we believe in the power of place and relationship. And we believe that transformation begins in community where people are deeply rooted, radical, and deeply connected to land, to each other, to memory, and to possibility. By definition, resonance is what happens, as Juliana told us, when one vibration meets another, when something shared creates movement in someone else, when we allow ourselves to be moved by the sound, the story, the grief, the joy, the vision of another person, something greater is born. So resonance isn't a solo act. It's not something we can do by ourselves. It takes relationship. It takes rhythm. It takes attunement. And so in our time together, we're already vibrating. We're already gathering here with a special kind of energy where you all, people, us, from across sectors, across backgrounds, across geographies, organizers, artists, policymakers, farmers, educators, funders, are coming together not just to think, but to feel, to remember, to reimagine, and to build. At Resonance Network, we talk about our work as world building, having the courage to imagine the world that we want, that our descendants deserve, and the courage to start building that world right now. So we're here to bring our sound and to be moved by yours. And we're here to practice story, not just talk about it. And we're here to build beloved community, not just as a dream, but as something we do in real time. So on the slides, you'll see that they'll rotate through with some definitions of the terms that Ed and I will be using, if I remember to click through them. And so let those hold the space and illuminate some of what we'll share in our stories and in our conversation. I will forewarn you that at the end, we're going to invite you into practice. And so for people who need a little bit of time to warm up to the idea of turning to your neighbor and talking to your neighbor, Get ready. Thank you. So thank you. Thank you so much for making space for us. Thank you for showing up for each other. And let's keep finding the frequency that we share. And let's begin. Ed?
Good morning, everybody. It is so good to be here with you today. As Alexis said, I come from Duluth, Minnesota, by way of growing up in northern Wisconsin, Ashland, Wisconsin, and small town communities around there. And it's already been moving to be here this morning and listen to the stories and the music and the things that people have shared. And in my work, in peacemaking work, I've found that usually I find myself explaining or trying to defend or helping people understand what rural communities bring and the wisdom that exists. And so it's powerful to be in this space where that's what we're all about today. So we're going to set a frame for what we're going to talk about, what's going to happen in our workshops, all that kind of stuff. We're here to kick off these 2 days of building beloved community together. And when we say building beloved community, it's not just a fancy $5 word. What we mean is that these are communities where nobody is dispensable. Everybody that's in this room, everybody that's in this community is valued and belongs. Their safety and their dignity matters. And we create spaces where pain and healing can happen simultaneously. And those are some parts of what we mean by beloved community. We're also here to acknowledge and bring forward the stories that share the depths of wisdom that exist in rural communities, as well as the challenges and the struggles that exist. And as much as we might tend to lean one way or the other into those challenges or that wisdom, it's actually the connection between the two. It's both that creates wholeness. And if we can tell those stories, they create a pathway to how we might create something even better. So I'm going to kick us off with a little bit of story. I'm not the kind of storyteller like Jake who's used to being on a big stage in front of people. And so when folks introduce me as a storyteller, that's kind of a shorthand for he's long-winded. It's just the truth. And the way that Alexis and I tell stories, you'll experience this if you come to a workshop, is we let the stories emerge in the moment. But this is a very tight timeline. And so what we did is last night, I let my story emerge, and I wrote it down, and I'll share it with you now. So since I was a little kid, and to this very day, my summers have been loosely structured around town festivals, holiday gatherings, and the parades that accompany them. Parades say all sorts of interesting things about our small towns. Among them, I've begun to take note of the parades as indicators of the well-being of our community. In the Midwest small towns that have shaped me, people come out en masse to parades. And for good reason. They are a good time. There are marching bands, there's animals, clowns, huge tractors, and cultural communities that share their dances, floats, and music. All of these things drawing cheers and applause and warm welcomes from the crowds that are lining the main streets in rows of chairs that they brought from their house. Parades are made of familiar faces that make up the businesses, the public services, and the community groups from every corner of the region. Now, there's also more candy per person than should be eaten in an entire year. That's just a fact. And there are many particular nuances to each parade in small towns. My personal favorite detail is that in Ashland, where I grew up, we have a fire truck that goes at the very end of the parade in the middle of the summer, and it showers hundreds of adults and children alike who choose to get in its path with a downpour of cold water. And you want to talk about resonance. The laughter and the smiles and the squeals of delight just radiate through the streets as it goes through the parade. Now, there was a period in my adult life when I used to focus very much on the things that I didn't like about parades. And at the top of the list for me were political stances, issues, and beliefs that I didn't agree with. These days, though, I feel appreciation and relief that politics and beliefs across the spectrum are actually represented, while people from across the community still gather peacefully. And generally speaking, we're pretty happy to see one another. We wave, we take the opportunity for a little bit of conversation, tease each other, do that kind of thing. Now, while parades show us ways that the fabric of community is woven in ways that are more tight than many non-rural parts of the country actually think is possible, we can also see signs of problems. For example, in the places I come from, mills, factories, farms, mines, and businesses that used to sponsor and be a big presence in the parades are dwindling as they close up shop or are repeatedly sold to exploitative investors across a global community. It's also true that amongst all the celebration, there are signs of widespread poverty, addiction, and multiple other forms of suffering. And despite the generous contributions of cultural communities and countless friendly conversations with diverse neighbors, one prejudiced comment, regardless of who hears it, serves as a reminder that some members of our communities experience an ever-present threat of bigotry, racism, and other forms of discrimination and othering. You see, there's always multiple things that are true at once. Our rural communities have many challenges to overcome, some of which are the product of things that are done to us, and some of which we continue to do to one another. At the same time, our rural communities problem solve, persevere, and show up for one another, regardless of what happens in tremendously complicated and imperfect ways that, frankly, the rest of the country could learn from. Now, more than 10 years ago, my dad, who means so much to me, and is actually a pretty regular guy in the community, was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. It's a disease that has a nasty progression of physical and dementia-related symptoms. And this past year, it was impossible to attend the parade without tears in my eyes. Family members, old schoolmates, plumbers, heavy machinery operators, politicians, church members, coworkers, medical professionals, the owner of the shoe store, childhood friends, and people he had once had disagreements with, just to name a few, all made a point to come over to him, ask how he was doing, and make him feel normal and a part of. You could see his spine literally growing straighter as each of the people came over. They also made sure he and my mom knew that they were available if they needed anything. And some of them walked away with tears in their eyes as they recognized his decline. I've come to know that these folks from different belief systems and parts of the community have followed up with phone calls, food deliveries, invitations to go to dinner, and the performance of many needed services. And my mom and dad have found ways to pay their kids money to do things that they need done around the house and create a whole little economy around that. Now, my dad is on a devastating journey, but his community has his back. And if community can care for my dad, it really can do it for anyone. So these next couple of days, as we take time to look carefully at our very real individual and community challenges and even shortcomings during this week, may we also take full stock of the ways we know to build thriving communities and care for the mutual well-being of one another in our rural places. In these difficult and polarized times, those ways of mutual care and decision-making that we've practiced for generations, they offer a North Star, a beacon of hope for everyone, that these are specifically the times for us to step boldly into our know-how and potential across political lines to rebuild communities that mutually care for all.
Thank you so much, Ed. Thank you for your story. I'm grateful to your community that held you, the community that shaped you and made you into my very, very dear friend. So before we go any further, I want to take a minute to tell you how Ed and I met, because our story holds a piece of the larger story that we're here to practice today. I've been building beloved community with this guy for over a decade. We met in 2015 as part of a national leadership cohort called Move to End Violence. It brought together change makers from all over the country who are organizers, artists, activists, advocates, visionaries, who are working to end gender-based violence. But the program wasn't just about strategy. It was about transformation. When we began, we didn't start with slides or position statements or introductions that included our credentials. We started in a huge room with chairs sitting in a circle, and we told stories. On our very first morning, before anything else, we sat in a large circle. There were nearly 40 of us with 20 cohort members and like one faculty member for each cohort member. We took turns introducing ourselves, not with our bios, but in response to story prompts. The stories were about where we came from, the people and the places that shaped us, and the lineages that called us into the work that we were doing. It was the kind of listening that rearranges the room, the kind of sharing that makes strangers feel like family. And something powerful happened in that circle, something resonant. It really mattered that we started that way. Because just 2 days later, on a Wednesday night, we were shattered. After a full day of gathering, I returned to my room. I turned on the TV, and I saw the story that Dylan Roof had walked into Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, and murdered 9 Black worshipers during Bible study. I come from the African Methodist Episcopal Church. My family has been AME since emancipation. Our home church is Allen Temple African Methodist Episcopal Church in the Summerhill neighborhood of Atlanta, Georgia. The people in that sanctuary in Charleston could have been my aunties, my cousins, and my elders. On Thursday morning, the next morning, we had to go back into that room. I had to go back into that room with 40 people. And I wasn't so sure about it. We began to check in, and as people began to check in, you could tell by the things that they were saying that some people had heard the news and some had not. But as each person shared how they were arriving, the full story emerged through tears, through silence, through trembling voices. And honestly, I was afraid. I was afraid that in a multiracial space, the grief and fear in Black bodies would not be met. I was afraid because I had been in too many rooms where our pain had to be swallowed or explained or muted. Something different happened. Our indigenous relatives offered us their medicine and their songs. People made space for our sorrow without rushing it or trying to fix it. The agenda was paused. We were witnessed. We were held. In that moment, I understood what beloved community could look like. Not just as a theory, but is lived practice. It wasn't polished. It wasn't planned. It was relational. It was tender. It was true. That circle didn't just hold our grief. It planted seeds of a community that has lasted through loss of family, through transitions in health, through births, through job changes, through movement pivots, through organizational closures and strategy shifts. Ed and I started building resonance in that room. And 10 years later, here we are with you. And this is why we begin today with story. Because the conditions that allow us to grieve, to dream, to resist, and to build together, they start right here, in the spaces between our stories.
Thank you, Alexis. What a gift it is to have these moments where we find ourselves with the people and the communities that we're intended to be with at any given time. So as you can tell, our stories help us to name truths, to shine light on the things that are painful and difficult, and the places where there's a great deal of hope and light. And in the case of rural communities, which are often the communities that others tell stories about, it offers a great possibility to be clear about what we have to offer to the whole. And so, Alexis, we've talked a whole bunch about beloved community already, but will you say a little bit more about what that actually is?
Sure. There's the definition is up there. We have Dr. Martin Luther King's words, and when I think about Dr. Martin Luther King's words, it brings me back to the stories that I've heard all of my life about the neighborhood in Atlanta where all 8 of my great-grandparents lived at one point in time, and it was a neighborhood called Summerhill. During the Civil Rights Movement, around kitchen tables and at lunch counters in this neighborhood of Summerhill is where Dr. King and the organizers in the Southern Christian Leadership Council were gathering. And so I think about my family, my parents telling me stories about Summerhill. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about Summerhill to explain what beloved community is to me. My ancestors came out of slavery in the rural South, out of the red clay of Georgia, from farms and pine forests and small crossroads towns where people survived on what they could grow, build, and share. When freedom came for my people, many of them moved towards the city, following work in the service industries that kept downtown Atlanta running. So my ancestors were Pullman porters on the rail lines, and they worked in kitchens and hotels and homes. And Summerhill was a neighborhood that was founded before emancipation, and it was first a Jewish enclave. And it was one of the very few neighborhoods that opened its doors to formerly enslaved people after emancipation. So unlike many parts of the city, this neighborhood welcomed Black families to live alongside them. And out of that rare invitation, a kind of everyday beloved community took root. So my great-grandparents all lived within walking distance to one another. I've recently, last year, this time in October, I was in Summerhill just standing at each one of the addresses, like seeing how close these homes were to each other. They could stand on one porch and wave across the street to their cousins or to church members. And I remember stories of my mom telling me about her growing collards and tomatoes in the backyards, in their city homes, in the plum trees and the fruit trees that were in their front yards, and how much she loved taking care of these rural gardens with her grandmother, who grew up in Covington, Georgia. These rural people who moved into cities. They shared eggs and stories and songs, and they took care of one another's children. When someone got sick, they showed up with food, with prayers, with presents. And I didn't grow up knowing that all 8 of my great-grandparents lived in this neighborhood. I actually found out by mistake. I was tracking things on Ancestry.com and looking through census records, and I had the idea to try to plot out all the addresses. And when I plotted out all the addresses and I realized that all of these addresses were right in the same neighborhood, I went and asked my mom. I was like, Mom, did you know that all of your grandparents and all the daddy's grandparents lived in the same neighborhood? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, how have we never talked about this? This is some village stuff. What do you mean? Y'all all, she's like, yeah, they all knew each other. We all went to the same church. I was like, Ma, get out of here. This does not happen. What do you mean? This is wild. So that small town feel inside of a big city, right now, it's the neighborhood that's right next to Georgia State, right? There's a stadium and the Olympic Village was there and all of that. But it was a small town inside the big city, this neighborhood where people knew the shop owners and they had rural sensibilities that didn't disappear, they just adapted. That made city living possible without losing the values that has sustained my people for generations. So when I talk about beloved community, I'm talking about that kind of knowing. A way of being that says we belong to each other. It's not about perfection, but it's about proximity. We're close to each other in our hearts and in our practice. It's about growing food in city backyards and sharing it across fences and showing up when tragedy hits or when joy arrives. Beloved community is about the everyday acts that remind us that we're interdependent and that we belong to each other. So even for those of us who've lived in cities for generations, our roots are still rural. And those roots still teach us how to build community that can survive anything. Exploitation, migration, disinvestment, even violence. They remind us that beloved community is not an abstract dream. It's something that our ancestors already practiced and sometimes in the harshest conditions imaginable, like slavery. So when I say beloved community, I'm really saying something that feels like home, right? It's practice, it's responsibility. It's a circle of care that we extend to each other, whether we're in a rural county or a small town or a neighborhood like Summerhill. That's what my people built. And that's what we're going to build right here in this conference together. We're going to build beloved community to carry us through the next 2 days. So Ed, why is beloved community vital for rural communities?
Well, I think it's vital for everyone, but rural communities experience a particular way in which it's vital, because it's literally the way that we survive and thrive and create joy and problem solve. Your story just now is very touching, and the idea that beloved community is what feels like home, that really resonates. Alexis can attest that last night when we were letting the stories emerge, I said, this is interesting, because when I think about beloved community, I actually think about how it feels to be home in the places where there are the coffee clutches and my grandma's bridge club, where all the women came through the door with their perms and their desserts and all that kind of stuff, and then they sat at the tables and they rotated around and they they told stories basically about so-and-so who had cancer and so-and-so who lost their house and so-and-so who's working at the factory that's closing down, and they wove a way of being in connection and relationship. It feels like the church youth groups, it feels like the sports teams when they're at their best. And so there's a lot that the rural communities have to teach about what beloved community is. And as we face those different hardships that do exist in our rural communities, I think about the way that I see individual people who are parts of the community walk up to each other, look each other in the eye, and start conversations about what needs to happen. And that's a part of how we survive and how we thrive. But the other thing that I'd say is that beloved community is about those things. But there's also like the reason that I chose to share a story about parades is because parades are one of those things that, depending upon how you think about the world and understand the world, you may either be very excited about the parade that's going to happen that weekend, or you may not be. Parades have meaning and significance too. And so a question becomes, what sort of beloved relationship, what sort of beloved community are we in within our small towns, within our regions, with the people who think very differently from us, with the people who are angry with ourselves in relationship to that? And in my case, I can say that the story of the girl who was in one half is very resonant, because for a long time I felt like I was at odds with where I had come from. And there was a need to build that beloved community with myself and re-fall in love with the people and the places that had created me. And a big part of that was being able to see, even in the things that weren't my favorite things to look at, where the glimmers of possibility, where the nuggets of beloved community, where the care for one another actually was showing up, and to lean into that. And so when we talk about why this is vital to rural communities, I think it's a call to all of us to think about how we step as fully as possible into generating that kind of home, like we will figure this out generosity that my dad experienced, that we need to give to ourselves, and that we can do to solve the problems that are facing us in these times that are so polarized. And so, Alexis, would you say a little bit more about how storytelling is so connected to building beloved community?
Sure, but I'm going to be quick because I know these people cannot wait to turn to their neighbors and tell them stories. So, what I will say is there's a movement chant, and one of the lines of it says, ring the bell that still can ring. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light comes in. And when I think about what storytelling, how storytelling helps to build beloved community, is that it cracks our hearts open, right? Like, you can read my bio, but when I share my story, I'm allowing myself to be known, and I'm allowing myself to be seen. And when I receive stories, I'm opening myself up to be moved and to be changed and transformed by getting to see and getting to know someone else. And so I think that the way that the light comes in through our stories helps us witness each other and witness our humanity. And two of the definitions that are scrolling here have been about governance and have been about collective governance. And you might think, what in the world does that have to do with any of this? And the way we think about governance is how we make choices about how we're going to be together. And we learn how to do that in beloved community. And we learn what we need to make choices about to support each other's thriving when we can hear each other's stories and we know and understand what each other needs so that we can contribute to those needs being met. We're going to get to it.
Okay. So we are at the part where you get to experience letting a story emerge. And this way of storytelling, it's not complicated. So we are going to actually share with you a practice that Auntie Puanani Burgess from the island of Oahu in Hawaii, shared with us. She facilitated thousands of circles that were designed before she passed this past year. They were designed to build beloved community. And they started with very simple prompts. And almost always the first one was to share the story of your name. And we all have names. Some of us have many names. And so we're going to invite you to take a moment, and you're going to turn to a neighbor, and you're going to choose to share a story about whatever name you choose. Share the story of that name. We're going to give you about 8-10 minutes, so you can take a few minutes each to let that story come through, and then we're going to come back to this large group and see how that was for you.
What else did Auntie Pua tell you?
Well, Auntie Pua also told me that when you do this, you go ahead and let people do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, let's start wrapping up. Please say thank you to your storytelling partner for sharing their story. And we'll come back into this big group space. So, we have many great sessions to get to today, and we're going to make sure that we get out of here in good time. Thank you for taking the time to share the story of your name with one another. We did it up here. It was as good as it always is. And I'd invite you just to consider, how did it feel to do that? What was it like to tell a story when you didn't have a plan for what you were going to say? And what becomes possible when we introduce ourselves through story instead of the usual way we might introduce ourselves with our names and our titles and all that kind of stuff?
So sit with those questions as long as you're sitting with Jake's invitations, which were so resonant, right? Where do I see myself in that story? Where is that vibration touching my vibration? What is that movement moving in me? We're creating a thriving community here in this space together. A beloved community that's possible only because of the people who are in this room. Adrienne Maree Brown tells us that there's a conversation that only the people in this room can have, and it's our job to find it. Let's find it together over these next 2 days. Let's witness each other. Let's let our stories resonate. The stories we share here shape how we govern ourselves and care for one another. And that is a practice of collective thriving. So we're going to invite all of you to keep turning to your neighbor, keep leaning into this conference with courage, with curiosity, with open-heartedness. And we look forward to seeing you over the next 2 days. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much. I'm going to keep going while I give them a couple minutes to gather. So if you came only for the keynote, consider keep hanging out with us. Maybe got a little taste and you're like, these people are cool. I want more. You can. And a reminder that tomorrow morning, our keynote, we have 3 amazing rural librarians coming to join us to talk about the role of libraries in rural places with a local moderator as well who works at one of our local libraries. And tonight, we'd love for you to join us at the Connect event as well at Allison's Orchard. We have buses leaving from the courtyard starting to load around 4:30, and there's 2 buses that'll be going back and forth for that. We have an artist, Shanta Lee, who has a food stories project that she's going to be sharing with us there. Very excited about that. And then just a note about the Solution Slam tomorrow. If you've been to Radically Rural before, you know how this works, but there's sign-up sheets out in the lobby. Fill it in. We're going to select 10 to 15. And if we select yours to present tomorrow, then we will contact you through the app. It's 1 minute. You must time yourself and practice. Otherwise, it's going to be super embarrassing tomorrow because we really do cut you off. And, you know, just know people can come up and talk to you more about it afterward if you want. There is a $500 prize that's audience voted. So please think about, you know, some ideas that we've done before: a Touch a Trade event, municipal calendar hosted by local news organizations, sober gathering space. They could be ideas that you're just thinking about but haven't done, or initiatives that are already underway. Okay, and then we have 4 sessions. I think I'm supposed to be clicking something. Do you have the clicker? We have 4 sessions next. We do have volunteers who are going to be holding up signs that are going to lead people to those sessions. So if you're not sure where to go, find the group that's going to the session you hope to attend. And so my last note for you today is just, let's get radical, okay? Have a great day.